Michael Davidson stared at his computer screen, the familiar Bloomberg terminal's green numbers blurring before his eyes. After 30 years as an investment advisor, he thought he'd seen everything. But the email that just landed in his inbox made his stomach churn. "Hey, old man," it read, "thought you might want to see this before everyone else does." The attached photos showed his wife Sarah at the Eagle Ridge Country Club, his country club, sitting intimately close to James Harper, his protege of 15 years. The timestamp showed last Wednesday, when Sarah had told him she was visiting their daughter in Chicago. Michael leaned back in his leather chair, his corner office suddenly feeling suffocating despite the panoramic view of downtown Boston. He'd built everything from scratch: the Davidson and Associates wealth management firm, their reputation for integrity, their place in Boston's elite social circles. Now, at 58, he was watching it all start to crumble. His hands trembled slightly as he opened his desk drawer, pulling out the antique silver flask his father had given him when he made partner at his first firm. The bourbon burned, but it couldn't match the fire in his chest. "Mr. Davidson?" His assistant Carol's voice crackled through the intercom. "Mr. Harper is here for your 2 p.m. Michael took a deep breath, straightening his custom-made suit. "Send him in, Carol." James strode in with his usual confidence, Gucci loafers silent on the plush carpet. At 42, he had the polished look of old money, though Michael knew he'd grown up in a trailer park in western Massachusetts. That's why Michael had taken him under his wing, seeing in James the same hunger he'd once had. "Michael, got those projections you wanted for the Peterson account?" James smiled, placing a leather portfolio on the desk. "Sarah mentioned you two might join Clara and me for dinner at L'Espalier this weekend?" The casual mention of his wife's name made Michael's jaw clench. He studied James's face, searching for any sign of guilt or deception. But James maintained his easy smile, blue eyes clear and direct. "Actually, James, I need your thoughts on something else." Michael turned his monitor, showing one of the photos. "Care to explain?" The change in James's expression was subtle, a slight widening of the eyes, a momentary tension around the mouth. Then his professional mask slipped back into place. "Michael, I can explain. It's not what you think." "Really?" "Because what I think is that my wife and my partner are making a fool of me." Michael's voice remained steady, decades of negotiating high-stakes deals serving him well. "How long, James?" "Listen, there are things you don't know. Things Sarah don't." Michael held up his hand. "Don't say her name." A knock at the door interrupted them. Carol poked her head in. "Sorry to interrupt, but Mr. Davidson, the Blackwood Group is on line 1. They're insisting it's urgent." Michael noticed James's face pale slightly at the mention of Blackwood. "Interesting. He'd have to pull that thread later. Tell them I'll call back in 10 minutes. He turned back to James. "You have until tomorrow morning to clean out your office. The separation agreement will be on your desk within the hour. Sign it, take the money, and disappear. Or don't sign it, and I'll make sure every firm from here to California knows exactly why you left. You're making a mistake." James stood, straightening his tie. "There's more going on than you realize. Much more. When you find out tomorrow morning, James. And if you try to contact Sarah again, our agreement becomes void. Understood?" After James left, Michael sat in silence, watching the sun cast long shadows across the city he'd conquered. His phone buzzed, a text from Sarah, "Running late tonight. Don't wait up for dinner." He poured another drink, his mind racing. The anonymous email, James's reaction to the Blackwood mention, Sarah's increasing distance over the past months, pieces of a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. Not yet. Opening his laptop, he pulled up his private email and composed a message to Frank Sullivan, an old friend who'd left the FBI to start a private investigation firm. It was time to find out exactly what was happening in the life he thought he controlled. As the city lights began to twinkle in the gathering dusk, Michael Davidson made a promise to himself. He'd built his empire from nothing once before. If necessary, he could, and would, do it again. But this time, he'd make sure everyone who betrayed him paid their fair share of the cost. His phone buzzed again. Another anonymous email. Want to know what else your wife and partner have been hiding? Meet me at the old Harrison Pier warehouse. Tomorrow. Midnight. Come alone. Michael closed his eyes, feeling the weight of 30 years of carefully constructed success pressing down on him. Tomorrow would bring answers, or more questions. Either way, he knew his life would never be the same. Sarah Davidson's hands shook as she deleted the latest message from James. He knows. God help us, Michael knows. The words blurred on her phone screen as tears threatened to fall. Sitting in her parked car outside their Beacon Hill brownstone, she watched the warm lights inside, lights that had once meant home, safety, comfort. Now they felt like spotlights, exposing every secret she'd fought to keep hidden. She touched the small scar at her hairline, usually hidden by her carefully styled blonde hair. The official story was a tennis accident at the club. Only James knew the truth about that night 2 years ago, when Michael's carefully constructed facade had first cracked after the Anderson account collapsed. The night she'd learned that her husband's legendary self-control had limits. Her phone buzzed again, another text from their daughter Rachel. Mom, what's going on? Dad just called, asking weird questions about Chicago. You said you'd handle this. Call me, please. Sarah closed her eyes, remembering Rachel's face when she'd first suggested the plan 6 months ago. Her daughter had inherited Michael's shrewd intelligence and her own determination. Mom, this is insane, Rachel had said. You can't steal from Dad. He'll destroy you. It's not stealing if it was mine to begin with, Sarah had responded, thinking of the trust fund her grandmother had left her, the one Michael had invested in his firm's expansion 15 years ago. The one that had disappeared into offshore accounts she couldn't trace. The sound of approaching footsteps made her heart race. But it was just Mrs. Henderson from next door, walking her Yorkie. Sarah forced a smile and wave, maintaining the perfect image of a Boston society wife. That image had been her prison and her protection for 30 years. Her burner phone, the one Michael didn't know about, vibrated in her purse. The message was from Detective Claire Martinez, evidence received. Operation still on schedule. Stay calm. Stay calm. Sarah almost laughed. How could she stay calm when everything was unraveling? She thought of the USB drive hidden in her safety deposit box, filled with documents James had helped her collect. Evidence of Michael's creative accounting, his connections to the Blackwood Group, the real reason his first wife had disappeared to Europe 20 years ago, never to be heard from again. The front door of their house opened, and Michael's silhouette appeared. Sarah quickly wiped her eyes, checking her makeup in the rearview mirror. Time to play her role one more time. Working late again? Michael's voice was warm as she entered, but his eyes were cold, watching her every move. He held out a glass of her favorite wine. Foundation board meeting ran long. The lie came easily after months of practice. Have you eaten? I had a very interesting afternoon. Michael sipped his bourbon. James came by the office. Sarah's heart stuttered, but years of practice kept her face neutral. Oh. How is he? Unemployed, as of tomorrow. Michael's smile didn't reach his eyes. Would you like to know why? Before Sarah could respond, both their phones chimed simultaneously. She watched Michael's face as he read the message, saw the color drain from his features. Turn on the news, the text read. Channel 5. The familiar voice of the evening anchor filled their living room. Breaking news tonight as federal authorities announce a major investigation into several prominent Boston financial firms. Sources say the probe centers on allegations of money laundering and connections to organized crime. While no firms have been named, our sources indicate that the prestigious Davidson and Associates dash. Michael's glass shattered against the wall, sending bourbon and crystal shards flying. Sarah flinched instinctively. You. His voice was deadly quiet. You and James did this. Michael, I dash. Do you have any idea what you've done? He stepped closer, and Sarah forced herself not to back away. The people involved, you think I'm the one you should be afraid of? I know exactly who's involved. Sarah's voice grew stronger. I know about Victor Blackwood. About what really happened to Catherine. Michael went very still. What did you say? Your first wife. Sarah met his gaze. The one who supposedly moved to Geneva. I found her, Michael. Last month. In a small town outside Portland. She told me everything. The sound of a key in the front door made them both turn. James walked in, followed by Detective Martinez and two uniformed officers. Sarah. James's voice was urgent. We have to go. Now. They found Victor's body an hour ago. Michael laughed, a hollow sound that raised the hair on Sarah's neck. You still think this is about money, don't you? About your grandmother's trust fund? He shook his head. You have no idea what you've stumbled into. What I've been protecting you from all these years. Michael Davidson, Detective Martinez stepped forward, you're under arrest dash. The lights went out, plunging the house into darkness. Sarah heard a scuffle, a muffled curse, then the distinctive sound of breaking glass. By the time the backup generator kicked in 30 seconds later, Michael was gone. James grabbed Sarah's arm. We need to move. Now. I've got a safe house ready. Wait. Sarah pulled away, running to Michael's study. The painting behind his desk hung crooked, the safe behind it open and empty. But Sarah wasn't looking for the safe. Her hands found the hidden catch beneath the desk that Michael didn't know she knew about. Inside the secret compartment was a single red notebook, its pages filled with Michael's meticulous handwriting. As she quickly scanned the contents, Sarah felt the last pieces of her world collapse. Oh God, she whispered. This isn't about money at all, is it? The whole firm, it was just a cover. James took the notebook, his face grim as he read. Sarah, we have to go. Right now. If these names are who I think they are. A car engine roared to life outside, and Sarah heard Detective Martinez shouting orders. But all she could think about was the last line she'd read in Michael's notebook. Project Echo Genesis, Phase 1 complete. Sarah's grandmother was right. The genetic markers are perfect. Now we wait. As James pulled her toward the door, Sarah touched the scar on her forehead again, remembering the strange dreams she'd been having lately, the odd gaps in her memory. She thought about Rachel, away at college, and wondered if her daughter had been experiencing the same symptoms she'd been too afraid to tell anyone about. What had Michael done to them? And more importantly, what was he planning to do next? Rachel Davidson sat in her dorm room at Yale, staring at the strange symbols she'd unconsciously drawn in her notebook during advanced biochemistry. The same symbols that had been appearing in her dreams for months. Her phone buzzed again, the 20th missed call from her mother since midnight. The headache that had become her constant companion pulsed behind her eyes. Opening her laptop, she pulled up the research paper she'd been obsessing over for weeks, Transgenerational Epigenetic Inheritance and Memory Transfer in Mammalian Subjects, by Dr. Elena Rossi. Her grandmother's name, buried in the acknowledgments, had caught her attention 2 months ago. Now it felt like a warning she should have heeded sooner. A knock at her door made her jump. Rachel? The voice belonged to Dr. Marcus Chen, her faculty advisor. We need to talk. It's about your mother. She opened the door to find not only Dr. Chen but also a tall woman with steel-gray hair whom she recognized from old family photos. Catherine Davidson, her father's first wife. "Hello, Rachel." Catherine's voice was gentle. "I'm sorry we have to meet like this. But your mother needs you, and we don't have much time." In a safe house outside Boston, Sarah paced the small room while James and Detective Martinez reviewed Michael's notebook. The morning sun cast long shadows through bulletproof windows, and Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. "The genetic markers," James muttered, "they're not just random mutations. Look at these dates, they align perfectly with Sarah's grandmother's research at the Blackwood Institute. Before Victor Blackwood shut it down and erased all records," Martinez added. "Or so we thought." Sarah touched her scar again, remembering the night she'd received it. Michael hadn't struck her, he never left marks that obvious. Instead, he'd insisted she needed treatment for her episodes. The doctor he'd brought in, the injection that had burned like fire, the dreams that followed. "My grandmother," Sarah's voice shook slightly. "She wasn't just researching memory transfer, was she? She found something else. Something about consciousness itself. She found a way to store memories in genetic code." Catherine's voice came from Sarah's burner phone on speaker. "But not just memories, entire consciousness patterns. The ability to transfer one person's entire being into another's body, embedding it in their genetic structure to be activated later." "Project Echogenesis," James read from the notebook. "They needed 3 generations. Grandmother, mother, daughter. Each one prepared, modified, made ready to receive." "Receive what?" Sarah demanded, though part of her already knew the answer. "The old ones," Catherine's voice was barely a whisper. "The beings that Victor Blackwood and his followers believed ruled Earth millennia ago. Michael wasn't just their banker, he was their high priest. And you and Rachel, you were meant to be their vessels." Sarah's knees buckled. James caught her before she hit the floor, helping her to a chair. The headache that had plagued her for months intensified, and with it came flashes of memories that didn't belong to her, ancient cities, strange geometries, knowledge that no human mind was meant to contain. "Rachel," she gasped. "We have to protect Rachel." "Catherine's with her now," James assured her. "We've got people at Yale Dash." Martinez's phone chirped. The detective's face went pale as she read the message. "We've got a problem. Michael was just seen entering Yale's campus. And he's not alone." Sarah stood, swaying slightly but determined. "How long until we can get there?" 3 hours by car," James said. "But they'll be watching the roads." "I know another way." Sarah walked to the window, looking at the private airstrip visible in the distance. "Michael wasn't the only one with secrets. My grandmother left me more than just money, she left me a way to fight back." She pulled a small leather case from her purse, opening it to reveal a syringe filled with iridescent liquid. She knew this day might come. She prepared us, me and Rachel. Those headaches, the strange dreams, they weren't them breaking in. They were us waking up. "Sarah," James stepped toward her, "you don't know what that will do to you." "I know exactly what it will do." Sarah rolled up her sleeve. "It will complete what my grandmother started. The genetic markers weren't to make us vessels for their old ones. They were to make us weapons against them." Before anyone could stop her, Sarah plunged the needle into her arm. As the liquid fire spread through her veins, ancient memories cascaded through her mind, not of eldritch horrors, but of the warriors who had fought them. Women through the ages, passing down their knowledge, their power, their purpose through blood and bone and sacrifice. "Mom." Rachel's voice suddenly filled her mind, clear as crystal despite the hundreds of miles between them. "Mom, I can feel you. I understand now. I know what we have to do." Sarah smiled, feeling strength flow through her transformed body. "Hold on, baby. I'm coming." She turned to James and Martinez, her eyes now gleaming with an inner light that spoke of power older than civilization itself. Time to end this. Once and for all. As if in response, every electronic device in the room began to buzz with the same message: Project Echo Genesis status, failed. Contingency Protocol Omega now in effect. In New Haven, Rachel watched her father enter the campus quad, flanked by men in dark suits. She touched the small scar at her hairline, identical to her mother's, and felt the power building within her. The same power that had protected her grandmother, her mother, and now her. "They're here," she said to Catherine. "But they don't know what they're walking into." Dr. Chen placed a protective hand on her shoulder. "Are you ready?" Rachel nodded, feeling her mother's strength flowing through their awakened connection. They wanted vessels for their old ones. She smiled, and for a moment, the wisdom of countless generations flickered in her eyes. "Let's show them what the new ones can do." The autumn air crackled with tension as Michael Davidson crossed Yale's old campus, fallen leaves crunching beneath his Italian leather shoes. Each step carried the weight of decades of preparation, generations of careful breeding and manipulation, all leading to this moment. The men flanking him, Blackwood's most trusted acolytes, moved with predatory grace, their dark suits blending with lengthening shadows. In her dorm room, Rachel pressed her palm against the window, watching them approach. The newfound power humming through her veins felt like coming home to a place she'd never known she missed. Beside her, Catherine placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "Your mother was exactly your age," Catherine said softly, "when I first realized what Michael was doing to her. I tried to warn her, but he made you disappear instead." Rachel turned to face her father's first wife, seeing now the fierce protector beneath the gentle exterior. "You've been watching over us all this time, haven't you?" Catherine's eyes held decades of careful vigilance. "Your grandmother made me promise. We couldn't stop what was happening, but we could prepare you both. Every tennis lesson, every summer camp, we were teaching you to survive. To fight back." Across campus, Sarah's helicopter touched down on the medical center's roof. The transformation coursing through her body had heightened every sense, every instinct. She could feel Rachel's presence like a beacon, could sense Michael's dark purpose threading through the autumn air. James helped her from the helicopter, his face showing both awe and concern at her altered state. "Sarah, are you sure about this? The serum, we don't know the long-term effects." Sarah smiled, remembering all the times she'd hidden her strength to survive, all the careful plans disguised as submission. The long-term effects of staying silent were worse. Detective Martinez's voice crackled over their secure comms: "Target is approaching Vanderbilt Hall. Rachel's location is secure. Backup teams are in position, but static interrupted her transmission." "They're blocking communications," James said. Sarah nodded, already moving. "They can block phones. They can't block what's in our blood." In her mind, she felt Rachel's response: "I'm ready, Mom." The confrontation unfolded in the courtyard where generations of students had passed through Gothic archways, unaware of the ancient powers that had watched and waited. Michael stood in the center, his perfectly tailored suit incongruous against the eldritch symbols now gleaming faintly in the air around him. "Sarah." His voice carried that familiar note of controlled fury that had once paralyzed her with fear. Now it sparked only determination. "You've ruined everything we worked for. Everything I sacrificed for." "Sacrificed?" Sarah's laugh held no humor. "You mean like you sacrificed Catherine? Like you were planning to sacrifice our daughter? Sacrifice implies loss." Michael's smile didn't reach his eyes. "This was evolution. Ascension. The old ones needed worthy vessels, and I gave them what they needed. Your grandmother's research was the key, she just never understood its true purpose." "No, Michael." Sarah stepped forward, power rippling around her like heat waves. "You never understood its true purpose. My grandmother didn't discover how to transfer consciousness. She discovered how to protect against it. Every generation of our family, we weren't being prepared as vessels. We were being prepared as guardians. A high keen of rage came from the men flanking Michael. Their forms began to shift, faces elongating, fingers extending into claws. But Sarah saw only her husband's face, saw the mask of civilized control finally cracking to reveal the monster beneath. "Rachel!" Michael shouted toward the dormitory. "I am your father. Your blood is my blood. You know what you were born for. Come fulfill your destiny." Rachel's voice rang out, clear and strong, "You're right about one thing. I know exactly what I was born for." She stepped out of the shadows, Catherine beside her, Dr. Chen behind them both. The scar on her forehead glowed with the same inner light as her mother's. In her hands, she held her grandmother's journal, not Michael's notebook of perverted rituals, but the true record of their family's purpose. "Mom." Rachel's voice in Sarah's mind held centuries of power. Together. Sarah reached out, mother and daughter's power intertwining, strengthening. The old one's vessels screamed as ancient magics turned against them, generations of carefully hidden resistance finally blooming into open defiance. Michael staggered back, his careful plans unraveling. This is impossible. The genetic markers, the conditioning, did exactly what they were meant to do. Catherine stepped forward. Protected us. Strengthened us. Connected us. All those years, Sarah's voice shook with emotion and power, you thought you were breaking us. Controlling us. But you were just making us stronger. Every time you hurt us, we learned. Every time you tried to control us, we grew. And now. Rachel completed her mother's thought, now we show you what real power looks like. The battle that followed would be recorded in collegiate legend as a freak electrical storm, a sudden wind that tore through the quad with impossible force. But those who were there, those who survived, would remember the sight of mother and daughter standing together, generations of suppressed power finally unleashed, turning the weapons of their would-be controllers back against them. As the light faded and silence fell, Sarah held her daughter close, their shared strength still humming between them. The men who had followed Michael lay unconscious or fled. But Michael himself was gone, leaving behind only his notebook and a spreading stain of something that wasn't quite blood on the ancient stones. "He'll be back," Rachel whispered. Sarah touched her daughter's face, seeing in it all the strength she'd feared was broken. "Let him come. We're not hiding anymore." Detective Martinez approached, her expression a mix of awe and professional concern. "We need to contain this situation. The official report dash will be complicated," James finished, joining them. "But some truths need to be told." Sarah looked at her daughter, at Catherine, at the symbols of resistance and protection still fading from the air around them. "Yes," she said. "Some truths do need to be told. Starting with our own." As campus security and FBI teams swarmed the quad, Sarah felt a presence, not Michael, not the old ones, but something older, wiser. The accumulated strength of generations of women who had survived, resisted, protected. Their power flowed in her blood, in Rachel's blood, a legacy not of subjugation but of incredible, unshakable resilience. Rachel squeezed her hand. "What do we do now?" "Now." Sarah smiled, feeling truly free for the first time in decades. "Now we find the others. There must be more like us. More families with hidden strength, waiting to awaken." In her mind, she felt Rachel's fierce joy, Catherine's steady resolve, and beneath it all, her grandmother's quiet satisfaction. The old ones had wanted vessels for their power. Instead, they had created something far more dangerous. Women who were done being afraid. In the soft dawn light filtering through the safe house windows, Sarah watched her daughter sleep, counting Rachel's steady breaths like she had when Rachel was an infant. The power that had coursed through them during the confrontation had settled into something quieter now, a warm current linking mother and daughter, healing old wounds neither had fully acknowledged before. Catherine sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had long gone cold. "The first night is always the hardest," she said softly. "The night you finally stop running." Sarah touched her scar, remembering all the nights she'd lain awake, planning escapes she never took, writing letters she never sent. "I should have left years ago. Should have protected her better." "Mom." Rachel's voice came from the doorway, still heavy with sleep but carrying new strength. "You protected me every day. Every time you stepped between me and his anger. Every summer you sent me to camp with Catherine. Every time you taught me to trust my instincts, even when I didn't understand why." The morning sun caught the tears on Rachel's cheeks, making them glitter like the power that now lived in their blood. She crossed to her mother, taking Sarah's hands in hers. The contact sent memories flowing between them, not the ancient knowledge of their awakened power, but simpler moments, Sarah singing Rachel to sleep, teaching her to ride a bike, bandaging scraped knees with kisses and whispered encouragement. "You never stopped fighting," Rachel whispered. "You just fought quietly, strategically. Like Grandma taught you." James entered carrying files, his usual polish slightly rumpled after the night's events. "Speaking of your grandmother's teachings, we've been analyzing her research notes. The ones Michael never saw." He spread photos across the table, women through the ages, each bearing the same small scar, each carrying the same quiet strength in their eyes. "The guardians," Catherine explained. "Women who developed abilities. Natural defenses against the old ones and those who would use their power to control others. Your grandmother didn't discover this power, she found it, documented it, protected its bearers." Sarah traced the faces in the photographs. "How many others are there?" "We've identified 12 families so far," James said. "All with similar patterns, marriages to powerful men who turned out to be part of Blackwood's circle. Children, usually daughters, exhibiting unusual abilities. And always, somewhere in their history, a woman who escaped, who protected, who prepared the next generation." Detective Martinez arrived with fresh coffee and news. "Michael's trail leads to a compound in the Berkshires. But there's something else." She placed a stack of letters on the table. These were found in his private vault. Letters from women seeking help, reporting abusive husbands who seemed to be changing. Becoming something inhuman. Rachel picked up one of the letters, her hand trembling slightly. He wasn't just finding vessels for the old ones. He was identifying potential guardians. Trying to stop them from awakening. By breaking them, Sarah finished, decades of manipulation suddenly clear. The abuse, the gaslighting, the isolation, it wasn't just control. It was containment. "But he failed," Catherine said firmly. "With every woman he tried to break, he only proved our strength. And now we find them," Rachel stood, purpose straightening her spine. "All the others like us. Before he can hurt anyone else." Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders, but for the first time in years, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like purpose. "We'll need help. Resources." James smiled. "You mean like the offshore accounts you and I spent 6 months tracking? The ones Michael thought were his secret?" He slid a folder across the table. "Already transferred to secure accounts. In your name. Both your names." Sarah opened the folder, then looked up sharply. "This is everything he took from you. From your grandmother." With interest. James's smile turned grim. "Consider it a divorce settlement." Rachel touched one of the photos of past guardians. "These women, they were all like us. All survivors. Survivors. Protectors. Warriors." Catherine's voice held pride. "But first, they had to heal. To reclaim themselves." Sarah looked at her daughter, seeing not just the power they shared but the quiet strength that had always been there. "Then that's where we start. Not with revenge. Not with hunting. With healing. The days that followed were a delicate dance of recovery and preparation. Sarah and Rachel learned to control their abilities, to use them not just for protection but for healing. They found that their awakened power could sense others like them, women carrying the dormant potential, waiting to be awakened. Each night, Sarah added to her grandmother's journal, documenting their discoveries, their techniques, their hopes for the future. She wrote of the strength found in vulnerability, of power born not from dominance but from compassion. And always, she wrote of love, the fierce, protective love that had saved them all. One evening, as autumn painted the safe house windows in gold and crimson, Rachel found her mother in the garden, planting bulbs that wouldn't bloom until spring. "Why flowers?" Rachel asked, kneeling beside her in the soft earth. "With everything else we need to do." Sarah smiled, placing a bulb in her daughter's palm. "Because healing isn't just about surviving the winter. It's about believing in spring." She covered the bulb with soil, her hands strong and sure. "Every flower that blooms here will be a reminder, to us and to the women we'll help. That after the darkness, after the cold, life finds a way to bloom again." Rachel planted her bulb beside her mother's, and together they covered it with earth rich with promise. Above them, the first stars emerged, eternal witnesses to the quiet strength of women who refuse to be broken. In the distance, storm clouds gathered over the Berkshires. But here, in this moment, mother and daughter knelt in the gathering dusk, planting hope one bulb at a time, their shared power humming between them like a lullaby of protection, of promise, of peace finally found. The Berkshire Mountains held their secrets close, wreathed in morning mist as Sarah and Rachel approached the compound. 3 months had passed since their confrontation at Yale, 3 months of healing, learning, and preparing. The power that flowed between them had matured from a rushing river into a deep, steady current of strength. "There are others here," Rachel whispered, her enhanced senses detecting the subtle energies within the sprawling estate. "Like us, but dormant. Trapped." Sarah nodded, feeling the same imprisoned potential. Through their shared connection, she sensed Catherine and Detective Martinez moving into position with their team. James coordinated from their mobile command center, monitoring the operation through both conventional means and the network of awakened women who had joined their cause. The compound's gates bore the Blackwood family crest, an ancient symbol perverted from its original meaning of protection into one of dominance. Sarah touched the cool metal, and memories flooded through her, not her own, but her grandmother's. This place had once been a sanctuary, before Victor Blackwood and his followers corrupted its purpose. "Mom." Rachel's voice held concern. "Are you sure about this? About facing him again?" Sarah turned to her daughter, seeing in Rachel's face the same quiet strength that had helped them both survive years of Michael's subtle tyranny. "This isn't about facing him," she said softly. "It's about facing ourselves. About finishing what your grandmother started, not with violence, but with truth." They moved through the morning mist like shadows, their newfound abilities letting them slip past security systems both mundane and mystical. In her mind, Sarah felt the presence of other guardians they'd awakened over the past months, women who had survived their own versions of Michael's manipulation, now forming a network of protection and healing. The first woman they found was barely conscious, strapped to a medical bed in a sterile laboratory. The scar on her forehead matched theirs, but it was angry and fresh. Charts on the wall detailed genetic sequences and consciousness transfer protocols. "Julia Chen," Rachel read from the chart. "Dr. Chen's wife. He's been searching for her for months." Sarah began disconnecting the monitoring equipment, her touch gentle but sure. "They're trying to replicate what they did to us. But without understanding." "Understanding what?" Michael's voice came from the doorway, as smooth and controlled as ever. "That your grandmother's research was incomplete. That there are other ways to access the old one's power." He stepped into the room, and Sarah saw what Rachel had meant about the others being dormant. Michael's form seemed to shift between dimensions, the old one's influence having twisted him into something barely human. Behind him stood Victor Blackwood's son, Robert, and 3 other men from Boston's elite circles, all bearing the same otherworldly distortion. "You still think this is about power," Sarah said, her voice filled with compassion rather than fear. "Even now, you don't understand what you've lost." "Lost?" Michael laughed, the sound echoing wrongly in the sterile space. "I've transcended human limitations. Become something greater." "No," Rachel stepped forward, her power flowing openly now. "You've become exactly what they wanted, so focused on control that you forgot how to connect. So obsessed with power that you forgot how to love." Sarah felt the moment the other women in the compound began to wake, not from any action they took, but from hearing the truth spoken aloud. The dormant power in their blood, passed down through generations of survivors, responded to Rachel's words like flowers turning toward the sun. "You can't stop what's coming," Robert Blackwood snarled, his form twisting further. "The old ones will rise. The world will return to its natural order." "Natural?" Sarah's laugh held genuine sadness. "There's nothing natural about what you've done. The old ones didn't make you powerful. They made you hollow. And now." The awakening rippled through the compound like a wave of dawn. In every room, women began to break free of their restraints, not with violence, but with the simple, unstoppable power of remembering who they were. Who they had always been. Michael lunged forward, his form a nightmare of angles and shadows. But Sarah didn't fight. Instead, she opened herself fully to the power that was her birthright, not the corrupted version Michael had tried to force upon her, but the pure connection to generations of strong women who had loved, protected, and endured. The light that filled the room came not from Sarah alone, but from Rachel, from Julia stirring on her bed, from every woman in the compound remembering her own strength. It was the light of dawn after endless night, of truth after years of lies, of love after a lifetime of fear. Michael and his followers tried to flee, but found themselves held not by force, but by the weight of their own choices. The old ones, sensing the awakening of their ancient adversaries, began to withdraw from their hollow vessels, leaving behind men who had sacrificed their humanity for an empty promise of power. In the aftermath, as FBI teams secured the compound and medical personnel tended to the awakened women, Sarah found Rachel in their grandmother's old office. Her daughter held a photo album, its pages filled with images of women through the centuries, all bearing their familiar scar, all carrying the same light in their eyes. "What happens to them?" Rachel asked, watching Michael and the others being led away. "To the men who lost themselves." Sarah touched the photo album, adding her own energy to the generations of protection it contained. "They'll face human justice for human crimes. And maybe, with time, they'll find their way back to their humanity." "And us?" Rachel's question held all the uncertainty of a daughter still learning to trust her own strength. Sarah pulled her daughter close, their shared power humming between them like a lullaby of healing. "We do what we were born to do. We protect. We teach. We help others wake up to their own strength." Detective Martinez approached with news, other compounds discovered, more women to free, more work to be done. But Sarah knew now that the work wasn't about revenge or even justice. It was about healing, about breaking cycles of control and fear that had persisted for generations. In her mind, she felt the presence of her grandmother, of Catherine, of all the women who had kept their power alive through centuries of darkness. Their strength flowed in her blood, in Rachel's blood, in the blood of every woman who had ever survived, protected, and loved despite all efforts to break her. The morning sun broke through the mist, touching the Blackwood estate with light that transformed rather than exposed. In the garden, spring bulbs planted by generations of guardian women were beginning to break through the soil, not by force, but through the patient, unstoppable power of growth and renewal. Sarah squeezed her daughter's hand, feeling in Rachel's answering grip the promise of all the healing still to come. They had work to do, women to find, stories to tell. But for now, in this moment, they allowed themselves to simply be, mother and daughter, survivors and protectors, keepers of a power older and deeper than any darkness. A power built not on dominance, but on love. Not on control, but on connection. Not on fear, but on the quiet, unshakable strength of women who refuse to be broken. And in that strength, they were finally, completely free.